Welcome to the debate. So our source material today presents this incredibly ambitious approach to vocabulary acquisition. It details various techniques, things like leveraging cognates, exploiting different word forms, using really personalized mnemonic tricks, and it's all aimed at letting a learner pick up supposedly hundreds and thousands of new words a day. And the core question we're tackling really is one of quality versus quantity. Does this kind of hyper-focus on just the numbers, on hitting this astronomical daily word count, does it actually lead to effective long-term language mastery? Or does this speed-first mentality maybe risk creating a shallow, error-prone foundation that actually undermines real competence? My position? Well, it's pretty clear. These high-speed strategies aren't just tricks. They are essential, highly efficient cognitive shortcuts. They're designed to solve that critical problem of initial volume. They maximize efficiency and, frankly, drastically speed up the whole entry phase into a new language.
Mm. And I take the opposing view. I think prioritizing that immediate word count introduces a kind of systemic fragility. This whole speed-focused approach, it seems to deliberately bypass the deep contextual, semantic, and syntactic knowledge that you need for functional language use. And crucially, the material itself is just full of necessary warnings, warnings about idioms, about false friends, which, for me, inherently expose the fragility of this high-volume strategy. Simply put, counting words, well, that's just not the same as knowing them. And this methodology seems designed to maximize the former while really minimizing the latter.
Okay, but let's dig into why these shortcuts are so effective. The material, I think, correctly shows us how to leverage knowledge we already have, linguistic, cultural knowledge, and it transforms the learning process from what can be a really burdensome memorization task into more of a high-yield recognition game. I mean, think about cognates. We're not just talking about single words here. We're talking entire morphological families, particularly those ending in tion, which are so common across Romance and Germanic languages. Words like ambition, motivation, profession. The material explicitly notes these are going to sound pretty much the same across huge groups of languages. Now, that's a radical efficiency gain, isn't it? You learn one ending pattern, and suddenly you can access hundreds, maybe thousands, of higher register, often abstract words that require, frankly, minimal cognitive investment because the foundation, that Latin root, is often already shared. It gives you this huge boost in, say, technical and professional vocabulary almost instantly.
Right, you're right that TION words provide volume, I grant you that. But the problem as I see it lies in the methodology's assumption of effortless transfer. Just having a huge number of words doesn't guarantee you can use them effectively. Where I really struggle with that idea is the trade-off. We seem to be trading speed for contextual accuracy. And maybe the most telling evidence against just going for high volume comes from the material's own admission about the significant danger of false friends. I mean, consider the confusion between English eventually, meaning in the end, and German eventual, meaning perhaps. These aren't small slip-ups. They are radical semantic misfires. And they happen precisely because the learner is relying too heavily on just looking at the word, the superficial similarity. The result? The material itself says the learner must double-check anything you say. Well, that completely negates the speed advantage, doesn't it? If I have to stop and verify every single word I think I know, then the rapid acquisition becomes almost meaningless.
But hold on. That justification for caution seems to rely entirely on focusing on the exceptions, not the rule. The actual ratio of true cognates to these deceptive false friends, it's heavily skewed toward the true connections, especially when you get into academic and technical language. This huge majority, it provides a massive safety net. The learner needs to use those highly efficient cognitive connections to build confidence and, maybe more importantly, just get exposure. The real danger for any language learner isn't making a few mistakes with false friends. We all do that. The real danger is stagnation, giving up. And the source material points out, correctly I think, that knowing just the 100 most common words gives you 50% of all written English. So if these high-speed techniques allow a learner to blast through that initial, often crippling barrier in days instead of months, well, they're dramatically reducing the risk of quitting. Quantity, in this sense, is the anti-stagnation strategy.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. I don't think that emotional boost of confidence outweighs the profound risk of actually ingraining structural errors deep into your language use. If the communication failure is severe, like misrepresenting your intent by saying you'll comply eventually when you actually mean perhaps, that mistake carries a really high functional cost. That cost, I think, far outweighs the supposed benefit of learning 500 shallow words quickly. The issue isn't just those few famous false friends. It's that this whole approach trains the learner to rely on simple recognition rather than precision. Linguistic precision, especially as the stakes get higher in communication, it absolutely must trump sheer volume. Look, a volume learner might have 1,500 words ticked off on a list, but a depth learner, someone who understands the nuance and the syntactic environment of maybe just 800 words, that person is functionally more competent and much less prone to fossilized errors. You're building something quickly, yes, but potentially on very weak ground.
Okay, but we need that volume to even encounter those nuances you're talking about. And let's talk about how we measure that volume, because this is another area where the high-speed method really gains efficiency. My argument is that accelerated learning is justified because the learner gains what you might call morphological savings. You use one spelling, one word form to access multiple distinct concepts. I mean, when a learner masters the difference between the noun fire, the element, and the verb to fire, meaning to dismiss someone, they have demonstrably increased their functional vocabulary and their syntactic range, all without having to memorize a whole new sequence of letters. They recognize the root, fire, and their effort immediately gets channeled into mastering the different parts of speech, the different grammatical structures each version requires. That's precisely why we can claim acceleration. The cognitive effort shifts. It concentrates on syntax and usage, not just spelling.
That's a compelling point about morphological savings. I'll give you that. But I would argue that counting these multiple meanings as simply more words is a fundamental oversimplification, maybe even a bit of a rhetorical trick. It masks the real cognitive effort needed to master polysemy, where a single word form has several related but quite distinct meanings. Look at your own example, the word date. The material suggests we count 4 distinct meanings: the outing, the fruit, the calendar day, the action of meeting someone. Okay, they share a spelling, yes, but mastering them requires understanding 4 separate semantic frameworks, 4 different contexts, 4 distinct ways of using the word. The real difficulty is internalizing the specific rules that govern when each meaning is appropriate. How do I actually use the verb to fire correctly in a sentence? What kind of objects does it take? Who can be fired? You see? And this difficulty, it just gets amplified by idiomatic expressions. Take a simple word like miss. You have to miss a bus, failure to catch it. You have to miss a loved one, that feeling of longing. And then you have miss as a title, like Miss Smith. Simply recognizing the root letters MISS does absolutely nothing to prepare the learner for these completely different semantic spaces. So yes, you gained volume on paper, but you delay the real context-heavy learning that actually determines fluency. Depth demands that contextual immersion, mastering the syntax, which the speed approach seems designed to sideline.
Well, I agree that contextual mastery is the ultimate goal, of course. But these high-speed methods, they're designed to bridge that gap, the gap between initial recognition and eventual contextual mastery through use. And this brings us to the value of those highly specific personal mnemonics, the image association technique that the material really champions. These mnemonics, they're like the ultimate activation tool. They overcome that retrieval friction, the thing that stalls learners when they're trying to speak. By linking a word like spear, the weapon, immediately to, say, Britney Spears, or beetle, the insect, to a specific car or maybe a computer game reference, you're tapping into a pre-existing cognitive pathway, one the learner has already traversed, as the source says, hundreds of times. So the word becomes instantly accessible, instantly usable, because it's tethered to some high-frequency cultural input they already know. This lets the learner immediately incorporate the word into active communication, which, let's face it, is the only real path to actually grounding the meaning properly.
I come at it from a completely different angle regarding those mnemonics. While, okay, I acknowledge they can provide incredible immediate recall, I think they introduce a distinct cognitive cost, the cost of constantly managing that bridge, that link. True mastery means understanding spear independent of Brittany, right? And understanding beetle in its general biological sense, detached from a specific car model or whatever celebrity association. If the mnemonic is too personalized or too culturally specific, the learner gets stuck in this constant two-step retrieval process. First, recall the mnemonic image. Then, second, translate that image back into the core semantic meaning needed for the conversation. That actually adds cognitive load during spontaneous speech. It slows you down. And furthermore, eventually the learner has to dedicate time actually slowing down the overall long-term process to actively dismantle that crutch. So the speed you gain right now might be paid for with depth and abstraction effort later on. It seems like an unsustainable dependency to me.
But I'd argue that trade-off is worth it, especially in those tough initial phases where the learner has almost no linguistic infrastructure to build on. The goal then is active engagement and retention, not immediate, perfect academic fluency. These methods provide powerful leverage to overcome that initial struggle. They maximize all the cognitive hooks available, whether it's through the universality of cognates, the efficiency of morphological forms, or the sheer vividness of personalized associations to reach that necessary volume and build the confidence you need to form basic speech quickly. Volume, I believe, is the prerequisite for fluency, then fluency refines the volume you've acquired.
My fundamental issue, though, remains rooted in the material's own complexity. The fact that it highlights the necessity of mastering idioms, the inherent danger of false friends, the sheer complexity of polysemous words like date, all of this reveals that vocabulary acquisition is fundamentally a task of qualitative accuracy and getting the context right. It's not just a quantitative tallying exercise. The risk of ingraining serious errors by relying too heavily on these quick, often surface-level connections, that risk, I maintain, ultimately outweighs the benefit of instant volume. If the underlying structure is weak, it really doesn't matter how fast you manage to build a house.
Perhaps, but waiting for perfect knowledge often leads to the failure of inaction, doesn't it? The tension remains. You arguably must build the volume first just to expose yourself sufficiently to the language's nuances and its exceptions. It's only by speaking, and yes, sometimes failing, that you can discover where those true semantic borders actually lie.
Exactly. And the material, I think we agree, successfully illuminates this unavoidable tension. It certainly champions speed, but its comprehensive inclusion of all those warnings about functional errors like false friends and idioms ultimately shows that even the most ambitious proponent of speed has to acknowledge the indispensable, absolutely non-negotiable role of careful, qualitative, context-aware learning.
Indeed. We've successfully highlighted, I think, that inherent tension between, on the one hand, the pursuit of rapid vocabulary building, which seems essential for confidence in getting started, and on the other hand, the absolute need for linguistic precision, which is necessary for genuine, long-term competence. And ultimately, it's probably up to each learner to weigh the potential benefits of that speed against the undeniable requirements of long-term accuracy.